Thank you, John. I'm from the Archdiocese of New York, and when I was growing up, the Cardinal Archbishop was Francis Spellman. And Spellman wrote or had written for him a couple of pious nosegay booklets that wouldn't replace St. Augustine on your shelf, but he was proud of them. And one day he was walking down Fifth Avenue with a priest friend, and he turned to the priest friend and he asked him, "Have you read my last book?" And the priest said, "I hope so." I may have done my last book at the publisher now, but who knows? It's a book called Ecology, Liturgy, and the Sacraments. As many of you know, most of my work in liturgy has been methodological. The subtitle of my book, Context and Text, offers a method for liturgical theology. I say that deliberately because no one has the method yet. I would say that there are three themes embedded in and suffuse most of my writings about liturgy. They are history, theology, and sacramentality. But more recently, I have moved in a direction that engages ecology much more fully than sacramentality per se. And so my latest book is Ecology, Liturgy, and the Sacraments. As we begin, let me place history, theology, sacramentality, and ecology in relation to each other as an introduction. History. If you Google search the phrase for Common Core, you immediately receive 6,570,000 hits. This shows a great interest, especially in the American Academy, about the question of Common Core. Any number of these hits shows the importance of science, English, and math. It is said that success in math is one of the best indicators of success in college education. But clearly underrepresented is history. However, a teacher of world history in 2008 said, "Why teach history?" and outlined numberless ways that accrue from learning history. Given the latest battles going on in the Catholic Church today, I judge that many bloggers and experts could do well to earn a dozen credits in church history so that they might be just a bit more tentative about adamant declarations. After all, the church has evolved for 2,000 years in the four corners of the earth and in many and varied cultures. What I want to say to you, scholars of liturgy, is what professors at San Anselmo have taught us. Why teach history when you can teach liturgy? Clearly, the study of liturgical history shaped and continues to shape the ongoing reform of the Roman Catholic liturgy and other Christian liturgical churches. This admits of factual discoveries, serious research on the liturgy as it evolved to the present, and exciting discussions today about changing and evolving methods. In effect, liturgical history is one of the meanings I give to the word context in my own study. Theology. As many of you know, I studied at the University of Notre Dame in South Bend and St. Anselmo, Rome. The Benedictines who taught me formed me in my liturgical studies. Aidan Kavanaugh, Elred Teagles, Burkhard Neunhauser, Salvatore Marsili, Cipriano Bagaggini, Gerhard Beckisch, Manius Laura, Adrian Nosant, and Basil Studer. As John mentioned, my dissertation was about ecumenical dialogue based on the liturgies of the American Evangelical Lutheran Prayer Book and our Missal. And it was from then that I began to work on lex orandi, lex credendi, and how the rites and prayers, per ritus et preces, of what the liturgy means theologically. What they do reveal about God, the Trinity, Paschal dying and rising, eschatology, and the indwelling of God among us, and what they reveal about the human person and our life in God, in whom we live and move and have our being. Sacramentality. In the interest of what we Americans call full disclosure, I came lately to emphasizing ecology and the principle of sacramentality. In my thinking and writing about liturgy and the sacraments, my study and exposure into the initiatives of the Greek patriarchate were nothing less than mind-changing and literally spiritually converting. My interest goes back to 1993 at an interdisciplinary conference at Georgetown University, which a friend of mine sponsored, called Preserving the Creation. And my contribution was the sacramentality of creation. This continued in my book, Context and Text, the first volume, in 1994, and found its way more fully in the 1918 revision. My own thought on the specific topic of sacramentality and ecology, as it forms the basis for the theology of sacramental theology, has evolved, and the basis of Pope Francis's assertions in Laudato Si about sacraments, and the Eucharist particularly, concerns the principle of sacramentality in that God lives among us prior to, in a unique way within, and following upon the celebration of the liturgy. The function of sacramental liturgy in its uniqueness is both to underscore how what we do in sacramental liturgy derives from the world and everyday life, as well as how we view daily life through the lens of the liturgy and bring to the world in which we live what we have experienced in the liturgy. From the perspective of sacramentality, one can say that the sacraments are less doors to the sacred than they are the experience of the sacred embedded and experienced in all of human life in what we can call the sacramental world. This experience is shaped in a unique and privileged way through the liturgical action and the liturgy of the sacraments, which engage fellow creatures of our common home, the subtitle of Laudato Si. The principle of sacramentality always leads us beyond the here and now to when this world passes away and when we will see God face to face. In the meantime, the fact that we experience God here and now through each other and on this good earth is the principle of sacramentality writ large. Ecology of Liturgy. I turn now to a broader appreciation of the sacramental principle that might reflect on the underlying principle that I call an ecology of liturgy. I want to begin to offer two thoughts of Laudato Si. The first concerns language and our use of language about our fellow creatures on our common home. From the very beginning of Laudato Si, the Pope engages in words of relationship, not words of objectification. When he says, Laudato Si mi Signore, praise be to you, my Lord, in the words of this beautiful canticle, St. Francis reminds us that all our common home is like a sister with whom we share our life and a beautiful mother who opens her arms to embrace us. Praise to you, my Lord, through our sister Mother Earth, who sustains and governs us, and it produces various fruit with colored flowers and herbs. Now, while some have critiqued the female imagery here, and especially in the next paragraph of Laudato Si, others counter that these pronouns reflect a deep Franciscan theology and spirituality of, again, relatedness and relationship. It exemplifies what Pope Francis refers to as fellow creatures on our common home. He does not refer to others who inhabit this good earth as things. Biblical terminology all creatures on our common home are bearers of the living God and thus reflect the principle of sacramentality. Sacramentality is a worldview, a way of looking at life and living life fully on this good earth. To celebrate liturgy and sacraments does not mean that we shun the world and our fellow creatures. It means that we raise up our fellow creatures whom we venerate and, yes, even revere in our common home. We do not use them. In raising them up, we engage the world at a deep level of reality through which we experience nothing less than the living God. Note the verbs. We do not use the word use. We do not use the word thing, but with regard to earth, air, fire, water, bread, wine, oil. Rather, we use phrases such as we raise them up, we acknowledge them, we show reverence for them, but we don't use them. The second thought I want to make about Pope Francis's Laudato Si is what I think is perhaps the major contribution in the encyclical articulated the need for an integral theology, an integral ecology, and that's moving it beyond human ecology. And people like Vincent Miller at Dayton and Anthony Kelly in Australia have worked on trying to unpack integral ecology. It's not simple. Last I checked, there are 21 references to integral ecology in the document, and not one can serve as a definition without the others. That's another book. But the Pope wanted it to be a work in progress, and I think that that dialogue about integral should mark theology in general, and it should mark our enterprise in liturgy and sacraments. In the balance of the presentation, I wanted to answer the question, why teach ecology when you can teach liturgy? Rhetorical distinctions. Because the words ecology, creation, environment abound, I want to raise up what Pope Francis says about them to give us a frame of reference. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, the word creation has a broader meaning than nature, where it has to do with God's loving plan in which every creature has its own value and significance. Nature is usually seen as a system which can be studied, understood, controlled, whereas creation can only be understood as a gift from the outstretched hand of the Father of all, as reality illuminated by the love of God that calls us together. With regard to ecology, the Pope says, ecology studies the relationship between living organisms and the environment in which they develop. This necessarily entails reflection and debate about the conditions required for the life and survival of society, and the honesty needed to question certain modes of development, production, and consumption. It cannot be emphasized enough how everything is interconnected. What we really mean is a relationship existing between nature and the society which lives in it. Nature cannot be regarded as something separate from ourselves or as a mere setting in which we live. We are part of nature, included in it, and thus in constant interaction with it. Recognizing the reasons why a given area is polluted requires a study of the workings of society, its economy, its behavior, and the way it grasps reality. I want to raise up 5 things in which I will articulate the ecology of liturgy. Number one, cosmic contexts. I couldn't resist context because I've gotten a lot of mileage out of the word context. Liturgy of the Hours, the daily celebration based on light, darkness. Since we derive from the cosmos and the rhythm of the cosmos, the instruction of the Liturgy of the Hours underscores the importance of dawn for morning prayer and dusk for evening prayer. For example, it states that morning prayer is celebrated as the light of a new day is dawning. The dawn from on high shall break upon us to shine on those who dwell in darkness and the shadow of death. It's not a coincidence that this same text is used as a communion antiphon for the solemnity of the Nativity of John the Baptist on June the 25th. The date of this feast was deliberately chosen in accord with the length of the sun's rays as experienced in the northern hemisphere, just as daylight begins to diminish after June 21st, often called the longest day of the year. Church commemorates the birth of Baptist, who says, Jesus must increase, I must decrease. Diminishing daylight in the cosmos determined the feast of one whose self-effacement decrease led to people's putting their faith in Christ, who is the dawn from on high. Evening prayer, the instruction says, when evening approaches, the day is already far spent. Evening prayer is celebrated when we join the churches of the East in calling upon the joy-giving light of holy glory. And we sing now that we have come to the setting of the sun and the evening star. The seasons, the phases and location of the moon determine the date for our celebration of Easter. And even as we debate the possibility of a fixed date for Easter, endorsed as early as Sacrosancta Concilium, at least the debate is always going to be about the cosmos and where that fits in. Our origin of Christmas about the Dies Natalis Solis Invicti, diminishing intensity of the sun, again in the northern hemisphere. And the Christmas texts become more compelling as that is experienced in nature. At the same time, I also want to argue that we must be very, very careful not to impose on the Advent Christmas liturgy that light darkness, because, and frankly, you can't find that in the Ecology. Related to the Liturgy of the Hours and prayer is what is called the season of creation. Established by the Lutheran pastor Normal Hobble in Victoria, Melbourne, Australia in 2000. Did we get that? Lutheran pastor invented the season of creation in 2000. And it's become a phenomenon for many liturgical churches and many church calendars, official and unofficial. In the beginning of August 2015, Pope Francis asked that many Christian churches observe September 1 as a World Day of Prayer for Creation, and established September 1 as the day when he invited Orthodox and many others to gather with him in Rome for a prayer service. That links up with the Pope's intention to link up ecological concerns with ecumenical concerns. The Orthodox couldn't make it because that's the beginning of their church year, and number two, it gets hot in Rome. So the Pope gives out a statement and doesn't gather anyone else in funny clothes in St. Peter's. What the Pope says about a season of creation: I strongly encourage the faithful to pray in these days that as the result of a timely ecumenical initiative are being celebrated the season of creation, and he concerns about personal asceticism, engaging in creation, and revering the environment. To ecological contents. Hymn to the days of creation. I'm not sure all of us will be alive when the revised English language Liturgy of the Hours is published, comma, But if we are, people like me will be delighted to see that the Vesper hymns of creation have returned about light, heaven, earth, plants, sun, moon, planets, fish, animals, mammals, human beings. Hymns for the Liturgy of the Hours contain several names about God, the Creator, Founder, Guide, Maker, Author, Font, Source of all, and the Father. Probably 110 names in the hymns themselves about creation. Famous Conditor al me Ceterum and all of its related texts. Number 3, Rogation Days and Ember Days. At a conference in Yale about 3 years ago, Strucker's comment was, Rogation Tide, the 3-day professional feast before the Ascension Thursday, embodied the medieval and the imaginary. At the Rogation, Christians acted out their relationship with God, fellow believers, the realm of creation, the cosmos, and the physical and spiritual hierarchies that enmeshed them. Rogation days were in the Missal of 1570. They've taken a turn for the worse in the present Missal, and some would say it was one missed opportunity for the earth to be acknowledged and to be blessed, and the blessings of the fruits of the earth. Now, anyone who studied with Tom Talley will tell you no one knows where they came from, despite how definitive all the studies are. But something about marking time 4 times in a year, something about fasting, something about special liturgies, special about liturgies of the word, and the option was given in the last chapter of the instruction that local hierarchies might want to undertake that, and some have in a different way. Once again, the American bishops have taken a firm but neutral stand and have done nothing. There are also those prayers in the Missal that Cardinal Trinity referred to yesterday in that last part of the Missal. Prayers for sanctification of human labor, which was not found in the previous Missal. At seed time, not found in the previous Missal. After the harvest, not found in the previous Missal. Famine, suffering, hunger, those were in the Missal. In time of earthquake, those are in the Missal. For rain, in the Missal. For fine weather, in the Missal. End of storms, to avert storms. And one that did not make it into the revised Missal was in time of animal plague. We might have used that and adapted it in the last couple of years, but in any event, that's in the texts. 4, creation and work, bread and wine for the Eucharist. Liturgy is Paschal. It's always about the dying and rising of Christ, and our incorporation into and participation in the dying and rising of Christ. It begins in baptism and deepens whenever we celebrate the sacraments and all liturgy. Dining on the Eucharistic bread and cup is one of the ways we participate in the Paschal mystery and the saving sacrifice of Christ. But the means through which and in which we do this is the work of human hands. Well, of producing bread means that people have to work to plant seeds. People have to work to cut down the wheat. People work to make the wheat into grain, into flour, and then most bread rises and gets punched down, rises and punched down, and then becomes bread. Well, what is that but a Paschal process of dying and rising? So the material is itself a statement about ecology and liturgy. Wine. You plant the vine, you spend endless time, years, nurturing it, pruning it. At the end of the season, especially in Italy, they take a week off and get that hold the grapes down, and then they stomp them, crush them, and then they become wine. What is that but a paschal process of dying and rising? So the very elements of the work of human hands are revered because in those elements we experience the very mystery in creation, that is the mystery of our recreation. Life relation, last point, number 5. Well, as we engage in this ecological lens, we must begin to, what kind of reverence do we have for earth, air, fire, and water? Pollution. Again and again, the Pope talks about the dangers of pollution. And anyone who's traveled at least somewhat will realize the pollution of this world is incredible in some parts of the world. And the whole question of coal and the whole question of all kinds of pollutions. The Pope says no fewer than 9 times in Laudato Si how we must respond to that in our daily life. Food distribution and diaconia. Well, how many times did the Pope say that 1/3 of the world's food that is produced is not shared with those who go without? We just don't get it to people, and why not? Largely politics, sometimes big companies. But this is not a minor issue. It is the question about the sustenance of life, people dying. Just wages and working conditions. Leo XIII began our tradition in Catholic social teaching about a just wage. Now, there's been some question about the popularity of Pope Francis's Laudato Si and other teachings. But I would suspect they're nothing like what Leo XIII went through. Because we talk about we talk about just wages as a benign thing. They were furious with him. And the very same people who criticized Pope Francis about wages and pollution and social justice were right there doing the same thing for Leo XIII. So I want to say, take a deep breath. But again, that's crucial in terms of how the liturgy necessarily leads to living the life in light of ecology and liturgy. I mean, it's that simple and that complex, and getting our heads around it is, I think, one of the challenges that you've welcomed in this year. To conclude, in my opinion, Laudato Si is among the most comprehensive of any papal encyclicals because in it the Pope integrates a number of issues and ideas and ideals. The movement from environment to immigration, from the dangers of climate change to the urgency of food distribution, from political action on behalf of our common home to prayer and spirituality steeped in awareness of creation, from actions to stop pollution and deforestation to contemplation of the goodness of and beauty for God of all creatures, great and small, from placing the poor at the center of our lives, not the periphery, who are concerned for the cosmos in which we all live. How could one not applaud the Jesuits for making this one of the society's priorities for the coming years? Ecology is not new. Our articulation of it from a Roman Catholic perspective may be somewhat new, especially when trying to glean all the consequences. One aspect is an ecology of liturgy. And so I ask, why teach ecology? You can teach liturgy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kevin. That was a perfect introduction to our own discussion of this universal apostolic preference. You've given us so much material. I can't wait for the small group discussions to see what we're going to talk about in terms of how we can promote this. I think you've given us so much ammunition in ways that I've never thought of, so thank you so much, especially in terms of the aspects of the liturgy. I'm just delighted with this. So, but enough of me. If we have time now for some general discussion, reactions, questions for Senior Irwin. Once again, I ask you, identify yourself, if only also for the benefit of those who are watching this live stream or will see the recordings. So please identify yourself and where you're from, and Mark will bring you the microphone.
Thank you, Father. That was really wonderful. My name is Adam Lalonde. I'm a Canadian Jesuit here. And I was just curious. I mean, you touched on this a little bit when you talked about language of relationship over objectification and use and all that. But I just wonder if there's anything specific in the liturgy and the translations or the formulations of the liturgy as they currently exist that you think might need rethinking or particularly problematic in terms of how they affect our, how they shape our way of engaging with creation or thinking about creation?
Well, thank you. One example, and then a bit of a spin-off of that. The late 1950s, the These office was revised, and many of us began using that as an alternate to the Roman Breviary of 4 volumes, pre-Vatican II. And I'll never forget that the introduction said, the purpose of the hours is so that the humans can offer praise of God. They can articulate the praise of God through the Psalms and give voice to the Psalms and give voice to creation. Well, no, they don't. Creation does that. So it's a question, I'm going to use creation to do this. No. Creation does it. Creation is it, and we simply reflect it and raise it up. I think that's as simple as I can put it. So, and then more generally, if you take the turn that I'm offering, then we can never, ever regard any other living being as a fellow brother and sister on our common home. Then practices about discipline, asceticism, distribution become second nature, because this common home is not ours. We share in this common home. Give an example. In a parish many years ago, there was a parish priest who wanted to have a collection once a month for human concerns, poverty issues, rent issues, people needing job assistance. And so he entitled the collection, "What's Mine is Yours." Well, that's Catholic social teaching, universal destination of goods, the relative right to private property, not the right to private property. That was very Catholic nuanced. And 2 decades later, a businessman came into the office and said, "What's mine is mine." Well, it just depends how you begin to look at it. And I believe that there's a profound asceticism in Laudato Si that ought to give us a new set of eyes in which we don't objectify, but revere, reverence, acknowledge. And if those become the phrases, then I think we immediately turn the corner of any possibility of the other out there, rather than we are we.
Kevin, it's good to be here with you. Thank you very much. I'm thinking of the procession of the gifts in liturgy at Mass. You have three things going on: a nervous family who doesn't like to be seen by others, walking up the aisle as quickly as they can. You have the collection going on, and a song that people would have our noses in the books. So there's not a moment for attending to the gifts, to attending and maybe you might say meditating or contemplating what is being, the gifts being brought forward, and a moment of that kind of connection you're talking about, of relationship, not use of. So I think it's at least that one part of the liturgy that I think we can look at. To collection has to happen. Singing could happen, but there could be ways of approaching that. But how would you re-envision that processional moment?
Despite the fact that I kept it for 45 minutes, the talk has it somewhere, and I ignored it, so I can reprise part of it. But first of all, the action itself is a major statement of the entire baptismal priesthood's participation in the liturgy. If all we do is have host on the altar at the beginning, then once again we diminish the very intrinsic nature of what participation means, and it becomes Father's Mass. So it's a disgrace when we don't have a presentation of the gifts. Secondly, if and when we have it, I mean, I think one of my friends speaks in architectural circles and art circles about scale. What about the scale of the vessels we use at the altar and the scale of the vessels we use to bring up the gifts? What does that say about involvement? And now the pandemic has done us in with two species, obviously, and I try to deal with that in the COVID book, but at the end of the day, we still bring up bread that's bread, and we bring up wine that's wine, maybe in less quantities, but vessels and scale, and think about this, when the Cardinal spoke yesterday, I was in Africa in 1988, 89, and I was so taken with those processions at the offertory and the way people would walk. And then that was reprised for me when I was in San Francisco some years ago, and it was a Mass and an African-American choir. Of course, it was amazing. An African-American choir, servers, and an Anglo celebrant. But anyhow, but walking up in this way that you just say to yourself, this is being taken very, very seriously.
I'm Jerome Guingamp, French Jesuit. What I would like to say that I think that liturgical prayer or texts can shape our minds and our hearts. I like that in the Eastern rites Liturgy of the Hours, if I remember at the morning prayer, the Psalm 104, 103 is mainly taken, I don't remember, but I think each day or something like this. So they start the day with the praise to the creation. And it could shape also consciousness for praise service of the creation. Second, you spoke about the Mass for diverse circumstances. Yesterday, John Baldwin told us, when it's green, we are free. It's true, there are some. I don't remember what place they had in the former Roman Missal before the Vatican II Council, but mainly they are linked with rural life. And what about for us now? Most of the people are living in cities and big cities. And I'm wondering why in the church and the dicastery of the divine worship, they produce two new diverse circumstances mass, one for the pandemic and one for evangelization, I think. But they didn't produce anything after Laudato Si. For the praise of nature, for the respect of nature, etc., we could find topics. And I think such text of prayer during Mass could shape minds and hearts.
Thank you. First of all, one of my reactions to the last 20 years in liturgical life, certainly in America, has been the extraordinary burden that the act of translation has placed on all of us. Evaluation and kicking and screaming and politicization and all of that. So I feel like Eliza Doolittle, words, 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 I'm sick of words. So in respect on liturgy, the primalness of liturgy, and I think one of the critiques of liturgy is that it's not primal enough. And yet, I would respond to say that I would not be in favor of a mass formula about creation, because creation is shot through the hours, the Psalms, it's shot through evening prayer, and the very engagement in creation is the act of worship. So again, I don't want to point my finger at that and add something, but then I would raise up what's in the Missal already and the preface, first prefaces about creation. There's probably two specifically, Eucharistic Prayer 4, and then those additional prayers at the end of the Missal. So I think it's already there, and the reaction is parallel to another critique of the Missal was some folks are saying there's no Mass in honor of God the Father. Well, last I checked, that's how we begin and end. It's kind of like the Wendy's commercial. It's in there, you know, but maybe not maximized and maybe not fully symbolized. I think that could be true. And then the question about the Psalms. It's extraordinary to me that we have such a rich repertoire of psalmody from which we can draw, and all of our liturgies, and numberless of them deal with creation, right, as you say. So I think that's all to the good.
Kevin, thank you. I really appreciate it. This is just a clarification of something you said that I would find helpful when you were talking about the cosmic context and the phases of the moon and the whole Easter season. And then you made a reference to that Advent and Christmas cycle does not emphasize this. Could you say, is that what you said?
Let me go back to that and rephrase that. I believe what I should have said, and thank you, is that I think that the Lent Easter season collects do not deal with light. What I did say? Well, that's what I think. That's correct.
And Christmas and
I'm not going to say any more about that. That was 8 books ago. I can't do that. But
okay. The second, just a comment, is that this whole context is very important for students that I've encountered, especially from Africa. I just had someone do a thesis which was on Shona burial rites and the respect for creation and how it's integrated into the actual rite itself. So
And to be fair, you gotta say what you know, what you don't know. I'm not from the Southern Hemisphere. I read about it. I am no expert. Mark Francis is an expert, so it's a work in progress, and maybe I'll know more about it in 2 years. But I just haven't done that, and I want to be very fair that those have done much, much more on that. I wanted to touch on it because of the phenomenon of the cosmos, but I can't. No possibility that I could articulate what that really means. That's not fair. Not fair to you, not fair to me. I mean, it's.
Thank you, Monsignor, for your wonderful presentation. I just wanted to make a comment about acknowledging creation. At Santa Clara a few years ago, I'm Dennis Smolarski from Santa Clara University in California. A few years ago, we had an inauguration of a new president, and the land that the mission rests on is Ohlone and Moeca Ohlone Indian land, Native American land. But they invited somebody from the tribe to come and do somewhat of a classical Indian blessing, Native American blessing for those who had gathered together. And I found it striking of the acknowledgement of creation that was incorporated in this. He asked everybody present to face the 4 directions of the compass, to look at the sky, to look at the ground. And he used the word not God, but grandfather. Oh, grandfather, we thank you for the west where the wind blows. We thank you for the east where the mountains are, north and south, the sky that brings us the rain, the ground from which our food comes forth. But it was something that I've never really experienced explicitly in our Christian liturgical tradition that focuses so explicitly and acknowledges all of creation that surrounds us day by day that we just overlook. But I just add this as a comment.
And I would point again to our conversation here yesterday after the talk. We were engaging the parts of the Eucharistic prayer, and classically that's where praise for creation is embedded. And then heaven and earth are full of your glory, Hosanna in the highest. So it's creation and redemption at the same time. So there are things there. Sometimes, again, we don't hear them. And one advantage, it seems to me, of being a preacher is that you read commentaries and pick up new ideas every time, and you pick up a commentary on the Eucharistic prayer, and one will say about that heaven and earth are full of your glory, about creation, and somebody else will talk about eschatology. And so, I mean, it's an amazing multivalent moment that it's almost too much. And the older I get, I want to slow down this whole thing, because there are so many things coming at you in terms of signs and symbols and gestures and impact upon you, and you can't take it all in, which is one of my points. You can't take it all in, and thank God liturgy comes back again and again and again, because otherwise, and again, calm down. Again, one of my critiques is that we've made liturgy much more of an educative function. Do I understand it? Well, in Magnum Principium, with all due respect, it does use the word understand, and this is not my favorite word, because the ritus et preces are the means to engage us in the most infallible thing we know, unfathomable. So, and whether we get all the understandings that day of Trinity Sunday, I mean, you want to leave with communion and 3 credits. But at the end, that's not the point. It's that we abide in these persons, and these persons abide in us. If you get nothing else, that's what Trinity Sunday is about. So I'm sick of words, although I play with them all the time. But it's the heart and soul is so much richer than we've been allowed to make it, because of the preoccupation of correct, or say that, less inadequate translations, and because our emphasis has been on understanding what's going on. I don't think that that's necessarily the focus. we have baptisms in the parish, and every couple of months, and they're always at the Sunday Mass. And in the parish I helped out in years ago, the same pastor who did What's Mine Is Yours, he emphasized immersion baptisms. So people would come in and they would welcome the weekend and say, well, how many dunkers do we have, Father? And so how many dunkers? But communal baptisms in that parish were usually 5 baptisms, sets of parents, godparents, siblings who wanted Cheerios and attention, and grandfathers with photographs and taking pictures. I wanted to immerse the camera because it was so distracting. But the point was, the next time, I'll hear that line that I didn't hear this time because the kid was pulling on his sister's hair. Okay, that's the reality. But sacramental signs, the repetition is what makes it work. So again, I think it's like putting your hand into a glove, and you experience it again and again and again, and then it becomes an experience of, well, yes, this is Advent, and we're going to do these. This is going to happen in a new way, and that kind of level of catechesis, I think, hasn't done very well, I think, among our folks. And they look for certain triggers, and very often the triggers of the old Mass are coming back to be triggers for the new Mass. Bells, consecration. At the end of the day, when you've got a Eucharistic prayer that's an act of theology.
Tony Lasvardi, an American Jesuit, and this idea that I agree with you that the closer we stay to the liturgy itself and the sensibilities of the concrete signs and symbols, the better off we are. And one of my preoccupations, kind of generally, and I wonder if you could give me your take on it, is when we start to talk about some of these things more theoretically and more abstractly, and start to talk about the sacramentality of the world, for example, it easily shades into something like pantheism, panentheism, that we lose what's, as you said, unique about the rites. And so how do we avoid doing that? I'm looking for your take on how do we avoid taking that step that a lot of people just naturally will fall into?
Well, I wouldn't mind a little bit of that heresy. I mean, I suffered so long from sacred secular. It's time to kind of merge and interpret. And I kind of avoid pantheism, panentheism, because I don't understand them, frankly. I mean, it's a philosophical way of categorizing these things. But words like relationship, belonging, responsibility, participation, those words help me in this. And everywhere, well, Catholic theology makes distinctions, so we have an awful lot of appropriate distinctions about how and where. And so inanimate objects, what does that mean? So at the end of the day, I kind of back off and I do kind of a lot of nature stuff. And if we dabble a little bit on the other side, I think Francis and Benedict would be happy, as examples. And it doesn't alarm me as much as it might alarm other people.
John Bolderman, Boston
my
College.
Goodness, go way back.
Just to my own request. Kevin, I really thank you again. The Ember Days fascinate me, and I like your comment about the U.S. bishops not having the imagination and creativity to deal with that. I'd mentioned, first of all, let me say, to quote Chauvet, Louis Marie Show. Now we understand that we don't understand, which I think is a brilliant line. But anyway, that's an aside. The Ember Days. There's a dissertation that I'm reading from your own university now, a book by Jim Sabak, a Franciscan, on the vigils in the Roman Rite. And it's fascinating because the first chapter is on the Ember Days. And he emphasizes, he thinks that the Ember Days really shaped the vigils of the other vigils, Easter even, so it's fascinating. But one comment he makes is that how cosmic and eschatological they are. So that really goes along with your theme. But the question, that was a comment, the question is, do you have any ideas about how we might incarnate the Emperor Days? As you said, the Constitution says we're not going to do the traditional ones, but we leave it to your imagination, if I can use that word, to recreate them. So any ideas?
Had was it would be a perfect way to do something about environment. Again, don't want to add another feast, but that could be something with regard to responsibility for the environment. I've not thought, but then there could be 4 times a year, there could be something about peace or something about migration, something like that would raise it up more than a World Day of Prayer for these things. And Sabak, I was the second reader on that dissertation, and Sabak was responsible for the quality of my weekends because it was so dense. I said, oh, darn, another chapter. But it's an excellent piece of work at Jim, and he's on to a number of good things by way of Dominic Serra. And he did learn a few cosmic things from me as we bumped along at Catholic, yeah.
I'll give it a good
Thank you. Thanks.
May we have a question in French?
Well, then help me out.
Merci beaucoup de votre exposé, tout d'abord. Et après la question, deux questions en fait. La première, c'est, on est, après le Vatican II, avec la réforme de la liturgie, on a des exigences par rapport à la participation et l'engagement du peuple dans la célébration. Et là, on dit qu'il doit être une participation active, consciente, etc. Et ça met un poids dans la liturgie énorme. Disons que c'est beaucoup plus de poids qu'on en avait auparavant. Auparavant, on n'exigeait pas ce type d'engagement des personnes qui sont là. Et finalement, tout doit être compris, tout doit être rationalisé. On a un certain rationalisme qui rentre par là dans nos célébrations. Ou c'est une manière de comprendre le Vatican II avec ses exigences de Sacrosancto Concilium. Ça, c'est la première des choses. Poser une question, c'est une problématique d'abord, mais c'est une question aussi. Et la deuxième question, c'est on ne met pas beaucoup de choses, on charge la liturgie, on cherche que la liturgie donne une réponse à tout dans notre vie. Et là, s'il y a un problème avec l'environnement, avec l'écologie, on cherche une réponse dans la liturgie. Alors, je pense que c'est beaucoup de poids et beaucoup de choses pour que la liturgie donne des réponses toujours, à tout le moment. Alors, c'est deux problématiques que je voudrais, moi, écouter votre réaction.
Let's have Charlie Potty. Oh, Adam, yeah.
So the first, very briefly, was about the Second Vatican Council's requirement about active participation in liturgy, or encouragement of active participation in liturgy, and the requirement of this engagement, and whether it employs now a little bit like too much of a rationalization of the liturgy, or a rationalisme. I don't know if there'd be a better way of putting that in English, but just overthinking and like intellectualization, I guess, maybe, in a way. And the second question was about, briefly, if we now ask that the liturgy become an answer for kind of everything that, I guess kind of back to your point about the learning place of the liturgy. So.
Thank you. Merci. First thing is, Trillion, the flesh is the instrument of salvation. So bodiliness. And sometimes we're decapitated and our bodies don't seem to matter, but it's about bodies. And So robust processions do matter, it seems to me, and the movement of the assembly in the gestures together matter. I was invited to review a book that was proposed by a publisher here in Louvain, and it was entitled Dancing Theology. Well, once we got beyond the Trinity, I was stunned with the presumptions of this book, and it was all about the individual solo performances that can be added to Anglican worship that make it inviting. And I said, hats off. I'm not going to go there. But bodiliness and primalness are essentials, and yet, one time we do gather around the fire is the vigil, and it's stunning in terms of contrast to other liturgies. So body matters, it seems to me. And then some of us who have done higher studies especially can be tempted to instruct by instinct, and even in our homilies. And so evoking and reminding folks of things in preaching, I think, is an important way not to decapitate our brains and make us function on the brain level. And again, scale of gestures and as important as a scale of vessels in terms of being involved in a highly symbolic ritual.
Andrew Cameron Mowat, St. Ignatius Parish, Stamford Hill in London. Thank you very much, Kevin, for your wonderful talk. One of the key features I find in my parish is the desire of the people to return to the church as quickly as possible. And in that sense, they want to be back together in their Christian community that they've supported through COVID and everything else. And they have a real taste for the being together, for singing, for praying together in the silence. And they're not interested in this invention of sacred means some weird transcendence of not understanding and not appreciating and, in a way, not participating. They don't want Mass in Latin. They don't want the priest facing the wall. They don't want a barrier of ironworks between the priest stuck on the altar. They want involvement and engagement. And for them, that is sacredness. So there's a real sacredness, I think, also in their family life, in how they've coped with the poverty situation in our country, on sharing food as well with the